Hello, and welcome back to another episode of A Fresh Perspective with Jeff Charles, where we prefer truth over narrative and principles over politics. And in this segment, we're going to talk about something, a government policy, big surprise, that's been destroying lives, wasting trillions of dollars, and failing miserably for over 50 years, 5 decades. Yes, we're talking about the war on drugs. And spoiler alert, it's not going to look good for the government, right? So I'm just going to start. I'm going to start with some numbers. Let me hit you with the stat right out of the gate. In the 1980s, during the crack epidemic, overdose deaths averaged about 3,500 per year. Let's fast forward to 2020. Now we have over 93,000 overdose deaths per year. So our government has spent over $1 trillion. It has militarized law enforcement, ruined countless lives, and what do we have to show for it? Well, we do have something. We do have something. We have more addicts, more deaths, and more government control. Yay! Yeah, that sounds wonderful, right? So, but seriously though, here's the thing. We already know that the war on drugs is a failure. You probably didn't even need me to give you those numbers to show you how much of a disaster, a disgrace this whole thing has been. So why are we still doing it? One word: fear. Let's go ahead and hop in our DeLorean, our time machine, and head all the way back to 1971, where President Richard Nixon declared the war on drugs. Now, Nixon did not start the war on drugs. He's just the first person to give it that name. If you check out my material on Chasing Liberty, my Substack, shameless plug, I actually explain that the actual war on drugs started under Woodrow Wilson. Big surprise. It's not like Woodrow Wilson isn't responsible for everything wrong in this country today, right? But anyway, we're going to talk about 1971 when President Nixon declared drugs to be public enemy number one. Out of this, we got the Drug Enforcement Administration, the DEA. We got mandatory minimums. We got no-knock raids, all in the name of wiping out drug use. In fact, George Mason economist Christopher Coyne put this bluntly. The goal was to, quote, eradicate all the social, economic, and health ills associated with drugs. But instead of fixing anything, we got prison cells packed with nonviolent offenders. But instead of fixing anything, we got prison cells packed with nonviolent offenders and communities torn apart. Let's fast forward over to 1981. The federal drug control budget was about $1 billion. By 2020, the federal drug control budget was at $34 billion. I would hate to see what it's at right now here in 2025. Adjusted for inflation, this is a 1,090% increase. The government is spending more on this failed policy, and it's achieving less. Mass incarceration now costs over $182 billion per year. 1 in 5 inmates is there for a drug offense. That's about $37,500 per inmate. We could have sent them to Harvard twice. But here's some more ugly truth about this whole thing. White, Black, and Latino people and Asians all use drugs at similar rates, right? Black people don't use drugs more than other people. White people don't use drugs more than other people. It's kind of about the same, or around in that ballpark. Yet 45% of drug convictions are of Black people, while only 28% are white. I'll probably dig into this disparity in a whole other video because there's a lot that goes into those numbers. But you can see that these are disparities here, which, by the way, is one of the reasons why the war on drugs started under Woodrow Wilson and why it continued under Richard Nixon. We already know that the war on drugs was specifically intended to target Black people, Hispanic people, and Chinese people, going all the way back to the early 1900s. So what does this mean? Felony convictions means you can't get a job, you can't vote, you can't exercise your right to keep and bear arms, you can't get housing assistance. It's a one-way ticket to poverty. And recidivism, repeat offenses. It's not a war on drugs. This is a war on people, right? Now, if you're listening to this, you might be saying, well, Jeff, okay, come on. I know overdose deaths are way higher today than they were during the crack epidemic. The reason why it's higher is because of fentanyl, right? The opioid crisis, all that stuff. We got fentanyl coming over the southern border. yada, yada, yada. And a lot of people have been tragically dying because of fentanyl. Well, if that's your argument, you're right and wrong. I'll explain why. Here's the thing. I mentioned about a little over 93,000 overdose deaths in 2020. But here's the thing. Fentanyl accounted for 60% of those overdose deaths, which means 40% is other drugs, methamphetamine, heroin, crack, you name it. That is still 37,460 people that have died from overdose deaths because of drugs that are not fentanyl. This is still almost 10 times more than the average during the era of the crack epidemic. So even if you take fentanyl out of the equation, overdose deaths have climbed drastically. So what's changed between the time when prohibition wasn't a thing up until now? Well, the black market, of course. Thanks to prohibition, most addicts don't even know what they're taking. And this is even before fentanyl. If you were taking heroin, you weren't taking medically pure heroin, which still has bad effects. I'm not saying it's healthy. It still has negative impacts, but it's not the same as the heroin you would get on the street, which is laced with all kinds of other substances to make it last longer, to stretch it, and for a variety of other reasons. It's one of the reasons why people get very sick. They get very sickly looking. They get all these abscesses on their skin. It's a whole different ball game than what people would get back in the day. Also, the substances are a lot stronger when you're buying them on the street than they were before back in the day. Again, that I can go down a whole rabbit hole with that, and that one day I will. But just suffice it to say that the drugs people are taking aren't exactly the drugs that they think they're taking. It's like Russian roulette with every hit that you take. Dealers spike these drugs with stronger substances because it's more powerful and it gets more people hooked. By the way, when alcohol was under prohibition, beer sales went down. People weren't really drinking beer like that, but they were drinking hard alcohol. That became a lot more popular in the speakeasy. Why? It gives you more bang for your buck, right? I mean, you can get drunk off of less hard alcohol than you would from drinking beer or wine. Now, again, another objection might be, well, okay, maybe the war on drugs hasn't been all that great, but it's the best way we can think of to deal with addiction. If we stop prohibiting drugs, if we stop having the government crack down on drug users and drug sales, then more people will die. There will be more overdose deaths because people will be smoking crack and using fentanyl and all these other drugs willy-nilly everywhere, and we're all going to be zombies like in The Walking Dead. Yeah, but that's not true, though. Remember what I said about fear at the beginning of this segment. The reason why we're not ending the war on drugs is because of fear and other reasons too, but I think fear is the motivating factor here. Let's look at what really happens when you decriminalize drugs before you start going all, oh, what about Portland, Oregon? That's a whole other thing, and there's some good points to be made about that. But in 2001, Portugal said, screw it. They decriminalized all drugs. And guess what their overdose rate is? Just take a guess. Their overdose rate in Portugal is 8 people per 1 million people, right? Now let's go over to the United States. What do you think our overdose death rate is? It's not 8 per 1 million people. It's 264 people per 1 million people. It's insane. As it turns out, if you treat addiction as a health issue and not a criminal issue, people actually get help. They get better. They don't die. They live long enough to be able to break their addictions, to deal with the underlying issues that lead to addiction, because it's not just a chemical issue. There's a lot of other stuff going on there. I learned a lot of this stuff from a book called Chasing the Scream, written by Johann Hari. I'll put that in the show notes. If you're curious about the subject, I would highly recommend reading that book because it taught me a lot. But let's keep going here. In the book, the author talks about a British doctor named John Marks, and he ran a heroin clinic back in the day. This is before the UK really started cracking down on drugs. I mean, they weren't legal at that time, but certain people could prescribe heroin if you were a medical professional. And in the area of the UK that he was in, he ran a heroin clinic. And he found out that people who were prescribed clean heroin, like I was saying before, the difference between medically clean heroin and the stuff you get on the streets, by prescribing clean heroin with clean needles, people weren't overdosing. they weren't dying. In fact, they lived pretty normal lives. They had jobs, they looked healthy. You couldn't really tell them apart from anyone else. I'll give the disclaimer again, because some of you are like, whoa, 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 whoa. No. I'm not saying heroin is a good thing. I don't take heroin. I've never taken heroin. I never will. If you abuse anything, even if it is medically pure, it can still hurt you if you're doing too much of it, right? Just like a lot of other substances, many of which are legal, like tobacco, alcohol, yada, yada, yada. So again, there's a disclaimer. I'm not saying heroin is a wonderful drug here. I'm just telling you the difference about as to what happens when you're getting it on the street from when you're getting it in a clinic. So if you compare that to street users, they came into his clinic, Dr. John Marks, they came into his clinic, people who were using these drugs on the street. They had wounds that looked like pizza topped with pus. That's actually what the book says. It's disgusting, right? I mean, chances are you may have known somebody, maybe you've had a friend or family member who was hooked on heroin or methamphetamine, and you've seen the physical symptoms of that dangerous drug use. It's night and day. This is not about whether drugs are good. It's about whether our approach is good, whether our approach is killing people, which it is. So a few weeks ago, I went on X, Twitter, whatever you want to call it, and I posted a tweet or a post asking people what their objections are when it comes to ending the war on drugs, because I really wanted to really dive into this issue, because I believe that the war on drugs is one of the worst policies that our government has imposed and is still continuing. It has killed countless numbers of people. It has ruined countless lives. And I got a decent amount of answers. I'd like to get more. If you're watching this and you have an argument against ending the war on drugs, give it to me and I'll take it on. Put it in the comments. Hit me up personally. I don't care. But one of my followers said that people dying is a concern. That's fair. Like I said, we've all have probably known someone or known somebody who knows somebody who lost their battle with addiction. It's tragic. But here's the thing, and this is what we really need to come to grips with, that something that we haven't come to grips with in this country. More people are dying because of prohibition, not in spite of it. Fear has kept us in a policy death spiral. More people are dying, and not just because of the drugs themselves. When you have a black market of drugs, now you have street gangs whose primary source of income is drugs. And what do gangs do? They kill each other. People do all kinds of crazy things to get the drugs. They will steal from friends and family members. Crimes in general go up when there's prohibition. So I'll close this out, but I mean, look, we got to be real about this. I understand that the solutions that I'm proposing might seem radical to a lot of people. And I understand, because chances are if you're listening to this, you never lived under a time in America when there wasn't a war on drugs. I would encourage you to look into this and see how things were different back then. I'm not saying they were perfect, but they were a hell of a lot better than things are right now. So I understand that this might make you feel uncomfortable. I'll tell you right now, I used to support the war on drugs and the idea of harm reduction or decriminalizing, or actually, I prefer legalizing drugs. But even decriminalization made me feel uncomfortable. It triggered that cognitive dissonance that we all have, because again, we have been indoctrinated, conditioned, and brainwashed into believing that the government, men with guns and badges, are the best way to deal with drug addiction. So if we've never known anything else, it is very difficult to think outside of that. So I understand what you might be feeling when you're listening to this, but I would encourage you to ask yourself, has this actually worked? Yeah, maybe for some people do go to jail for drugs and they end up changing their lives around, and then they end up breaking their addiction. I'm not saying that never has happened. It does. But it is way more likely to happen if we take a better approach to this issue. Throwing people in cages is not the answer. Fining people, making them pay money because you caught them with some drugs on their person, that's not the answer either. We need to start taking this seriously. And we have to understand, we have to get rid of our pride. We have to understand that the way we thought the solution would be isn't the actual solution. We were wrong. Let's change course and do something different, right? So let me know what you think. Let me know what you think. Hit me up. Y'all know how to reach me. But If you like this episode, if you like this segment, please subscribe, please share, and let's have more dialogue about this. Because even if you don't agree with me yet, or at least not 100%, you have to agree that the war on drugs has failed. It hasn't done what it set out to do. It never will. So I'm sure you can agree that we do need to do something different. Also, check out my Substack. I've been writing a lot about this over the past month or two, about the war on drugs, different aspects of it. And a lot of the things that I said in here that I couldn't really go into, I've written about on my Substack. It's called Chasing Liberty. Check that out at libertychasers.com. Become a subscriber, support my work. I appreciate it. But until next time, stay free, stay principled, and most importantly, stay ungovernable.